I think we are live and people are starting to hop on. This is going to be a great group and an incredible conversation. I want to welcome everybody today to our See Tomorrow series, which is really designed to help tourism marketers as we kind of come out of the COVID crisis and start looking at 2021 and beyond. And I'm thrilled about this conversation that is upcoming. And if our prep call last week was anything, this could be one of the most important conversations that tourism marketers have. And it wouldn't happen if it wasn't for amazing partners. And I want to thank our partner TripAdvisor for sponsoring today. And thank you, Steve, so much for putting together this incredible panel and this incredible conversation. So I'm gonna hand it over to you. And thanks again, everybody, and look forward to seeing you in September at eTourism Summit in Las Vegas.
Thank you very much, Will, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I know we've got probably some different time zones. Delighted to welcome all of you to the webinar today, Balancing Resident Sustainability and Tourism Business Needs, Risks and Rewards. And to introduce our panelists, who I think as we go through our time together, you're all going to very rapidly find this subject is a passion for them. I don't think any of these names will be strangers to most of you on the call. We've got Amir Alan with us, President and Partner of Longwoods International, Kathy Ritter, Director, Colorado Tourism Office, Jennifer Wesselhoff, President and CEO of Visit Park City, and Kalani Ka'ana, Director of Hawaiian Cultural Affairs and Natural Resources for the Hawaii Tourism Authority. As I said, each of these individuals are really leaders, not just within their own destinations, but within the destination space in terms of our efforts as an industry to identify and ensure the right balance between resident, visitor, and stakeholder needs on that path to sustainability. When you think about the work that all of you do in your own communities, you've had this long-standing role, often part of a mission statement, not always, to enhance the quality of life of your residents, and doing that by strengthening the economic fabric of your communities. And in 2018, a significant trend towards demand management and destination stewardship really began to occur across the globe as destinations were feeling the pressure of, frankly, what has been exponential growth in the tourism industry. And there's a whole bunch of great reasons why that's good for the world. It's good for our cultures to exchange, but with it comes the need for responsible management. And while 2020 put a pause on some of those efforts and the immediate needs that were driving them, it also provided destinations an opportunity to reset the game board and plan for recovery that aligns with your respective community's values and needs. And that is really going to be the driving force in our time together. So for many, the conversation has revolved around pursuing the highest value visitor. As we think about sustainability, we think about managing tourism within our destinations. And Kathy, I wonder if I might start with you first to speak to how in Colorado you're defining that highest value visitor.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, we've moved away from a come one, come all mentality simply because we were starting to feel pressure on some of our destinations, and it was clear that we needed to address that, or we were going to be dealing with a resident pushback against tourism. And so for us, it's really been about focusing our marketing efforts on the travelers who are delivering the best value for the state. And whether that may be due to the amounts they spend, but it's also due to where they take those dollars and what they spend there and how they travel. The simplest view of a high value traveler is a traveler who spends more than the average traveler. Thus, our highest value traveler overall is the international traveler. But there are other definitions for high value traveler that we've embraced, and we've created a new term around drivers of dispersion. So we place a value on travelers who take dollars to those less visited areas, even if they may not spend as much. It's hard to spend as much in Alamosa as you might in Denver, simply because there's fewer things to spend money on. But we know that the impact of those dollars is oversized in those parts of our state. We also place a value on off-season visitors. So for example, cyclists tend to visit in spring and fall when we don't have as many visitors. And so that's a good segment to attract. We also are placing a new focus on visitors who align more closely with our Colorado values and ethics because they lightly impact our resources and they fit in easily with very few ripples in our communities. And our Colorado residents welcome these kinds of visitors. And we're placing a new value on travelers who add to the diversity of our traveler audience, where we've convened an inclusivity and travel advisory group that is just about to issue its final recommendations. But we're seeing a real opportunity to position our state as an enlightened destination by sending an even more welcoming message to diverse travelers, whether people of color, people with disabilities, or people representing various LGBTQ communities. And we think, again, that is a traveler who enhances the value of our state.
Really terrific. I mean, I love that you have taken it beyond just that. How you're defining value is so much more than just financial. And the notion of connecting to the ethics of the community, the values of the community, I think is really important. And I guess that's probably also partly what drove your focus on diversity as well. I mean, that's something that Colorado as a state is focused on. And so it makes it easier to have residents behind that. Jennifer, I think you maybe wanted to add some comments there.
That's interesting. You know, I look back when I was presenting to City Council in Sedona, maybe 6 years ago, and using this graphic that had a pile of eggs with the golden egg at the top, and talking about this, what we called at the time, this quality over quantity message, and really looking at that high value visitor as a visitor who visits when we need them, but also talking about that we would prefer to have one visitor who spends 4 nights versus 4 visitors who maybe come for the day or just one night, for example, because then you start looking at those economic impacts, and you know that an overnight visitor spends maybe $600 per night versus a day trip visitor who maybe only spends 100 or so. The real challenge with that, there's 2 challenges that I faced. One, kind of setting the bar that maybe we're a little bit elitist when it comes to targeting what we're calling a high value visitor. And also the perception that day trippers aren't important in our communities. That was a conversation that was happening quite a bit in Sedona, because there are lots of businesses that rely on that day trip visitor. So you as destination, management organizations, we have to be really careful about the words that we use, because we don't want to come off as elitist, and we don't necessarily want to come off as creating this divide of overnight visitor versus day trip visitor, because both are really important.
Jennifer, you make a great point, and you and Kathy do a great job of defining what the high value visitors are. And as Kathy just outlined, there's so many different aspects to what's a high value customer there, but it's also important, we've seen it throughout our resident sentiment research, it's so important to share those definitions with stakeholder groups, with your various stakeholders. That way you avoid being called elitist, or you're only limiting, or you're only seeking one segmented audience, and that's we find that a lot of destinations do a good job internally with their definitions, but it's that external communication sometimes to the stakeholders that's lacking, and that's where they get into trouble.
Helps if I unmute. The reality, I suppose, is that within your destinations, you have businesses that cater to folks at all different economic levels. And so, in order to be true to that community, you've got to be bringing in a visitor base that can support those different things. We'd all love to be luxury travelers, but we're not necessarily all always able to be luxury travelers.
Well, and I think that too is changing a little bit now more than ever, that we've seen just in the last 2 years with the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation that's happening across the country and across the world. We want to be communities that are welcoming and open to everyone. It just gets a little challenging when you have a limited resource, limited budget, and you want to use that budget to the best possible economic impact for your community. So it really is a lot about communicating that, as Amir mentioned.
And it also gets to, you know, where you invest your marketing dollars. It's not as if, you know, it's not as if you're saying don't come, you know, to values that and to visitors that do not meet these definitions that we've been sharing. But it's more about where you focus your marketing dollars and where you focus your effort.
Yeah, that makes great sense. So, you know, a lot of this stems from the notion of sustainability, and that can mean many things to many people. At the end of the day, of course, we want to make sure that what attracts people to our destinations remains assets and attributes that we can continue to promote. And Jennifer, I know that you really dove into this in your work establishing Sedona's policies and practices. Can you speak to how you ultimately ended up defining sustainability in that work?
Yeah, and it wasn't an easy task because our focus was really on the tourism industry and how the tourism industry, the role that they play in sustainability, rather than a broader community sustainability plan or a community climate action plan. And it can get very big and difficult to keep people focused on what we were trying to accomplish, which is the tourism industry's role in sustainability. And in guiding that plan for Sedona, it really started out with trying to answer the question of how much is too much? Are we loving our community to death? And trying to navigate sort of a little bit of the residential rebellion that was starting to happen in the community and creating sort of this us versus them mentality of locals versus visitors. So that was really our task in creating the Sustainable Tourism Plan. And as we did the research surveying our visitors, our businesses, and our residents, which was the first time our organization had ever actually surveyed residents to get their feeling about residential sentiments. Sustainable tourism definition really came down to balance and balancing a thriving economy and visitor experience, which organizations like ours are typically really good at already, with protecting the environment and the quality of life of our residents, which is typically something that organizations like ours don't really look at. So it was about, our definition was really about balancing those four pillars. And a key theme that really came out of that was connection and better connecting our visitors with our locals, and better connecting and educating our locals about the value of tourism, and connecting businesses to residents and connecting visitors to the land. So it was really a major theme that came out of the development of the Sustainable Tourism Plan, in trying to balance those pillars and connecting people together in a more meaningful way. But also using the power of our influence as an organization. You know, we had 1,000 members representing 14,000 employees. We have a tremendous amount of influence that we can provide to those businesses and to those employees, and influence of our visitors and their behavior. So it really came down to connection and better galvanizing our influence in the community and in our markets.
Yeah, Jennifer, if I could just add on to that, I think what may be unique in Hawaii is this idea of maka'ikai, and I'll put it in the chat. But it's a Hawaiian word that means basically a kama'aina, someone of the place, is guiding the experience of the visitor. And it was a reciprocal relationship. And so this idea of hospitality in the Hawaiian context is one of reciprocal and similar intentions. And so a lot of our effort now has been spent on pre-arrival education and then post-arrival education as part of what makes this fabric of this community unique, so that, to the point about what is a high value visitor, someone that is, values aligned, is really important to us too. But also just little things like, I think oftentimes when we travel, we go in looking for experiences. I want to do this, I want to see that, I want to go there. but give little thought to, hey, what can I give back to enrich this place? I love Hawaii so much. What can I give back while I'm there? And so really, that's something we're looking at really importantly right now to strike that balance.
Well, and how fabulous is that? Because, you know, it aligns with, again, sort of the values of your community, but it also aligns with what visitors are seeking today, right? They want those authentic experiences. How many times do you hear people say, I want to go where the locals go? This isn't even new. It's just something that innately as travelers we seek. And I just think we're seeking it more and more today. So I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I really appreciate how Kalani and Jennifer are putting their sustainability efforts into such human terms, because I do think this is the key to changing behavior too. In Colorado, we really focused on on educating our travelers. I love the way you've tied it into your cultural history, Kalani, but ours is really more about tapping into that. The ethic in Colorado that already exists about protecting our natural resources and sharing that with our visitors. And that's where we've really focused our efforts on education. We partnered with the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics, which is based in Boulder, Colorado, to develop what we call the Care for Colorado principles. And then we have been engaging the past 3 years in sharing those messages out in creative, fun, engaging ways with people, so that they learn when they're in Colorado and hopefully take those behaviors, elsewhere on the next places they visit. And like you, Kalani, we also have really been applying a lot of thought to how we turn our efforts into a more regenerative model of tourism and find ways for visitors to give back to the state while they're here for the same reasons, because they love Colorado. and there's just an openness to find ways to support trails, to support 14ers, and other causes that are dear to the hearts of Coloradans.
Mm-hmm. And don't you feel though that this is sort of a new day for destination marketing and management organizations? I remember so many times over the last several years hearing DMO leaders say, our job is to get the visitor to our community, and then you guys fight over them, right? Instead of the shift that we're starting to see, whether we're calling it destination management or destination stewardship, or the whole conversation about, are we destination marketing organizations? Are we destination management organizations? And I think that's just has shifted so much over the years, with instead of our role just being getting them here, it's also influencing their behavior while they're here, dispersing them and making sure that we're not overloving certain areas and really spreading that money and that impact around our communities. And it's really a shift from a traditional marketing and sales agency to a more holistic management organization, which of course marketing and sales is part of that. So I think it'll be interesting to see how sustainable tourism plays a role in that shift.
Yeah, and the DMO of the future, is going to have to be good at engagement, to create those connections that you talk about, Jennifer, and, the example that Kathy provided in Kalani, it all begins with engagement, and engagement's a two-way street. The good news is that, the data shows the resident and the visitor are both receptive to that engagement, if done properly.
Yeah, we went all in on that concept this past winter with a brand new backcountry safety awareness campaign. And we were very clear when we were communicating that campaign that we were not trying to stimulate interest in visiting the backcountry. We were focusing our effort on making sure that people who chose that activity this winter were doing it safely. And we included an element where people could donate to Colorado Search and Rescue, which has been extremely strapped with the wave of people seeking outdoor recreation on our public lands. So it was almost an anti-promotion message. It was all about, being safe if you're going out there.
It makes me wonder if there isn't an ancillary benefit of all this work that you're doing within your own destinations to educate visitors to your destinations, but also your residents. It kind of speaks to the collective fabric of this, because each traveler and each resident that you educate becomes a traveler to another destination who hopefully takes some of those learnings with them in terms of how to be a responsible traveler and maybe a traveler who is giving back to that community they're visiting in some way. So I love, that sort of interrelationship that potentially happens through all of this. Kalani, I've often used this term, so if there are people on the call who've heard me use it, sorry, but this notion of that which gets measured gets attention. And you've really redefined what success looks like for Hawaii and how that gets measured. So I was hoping you could just share some of those new measurement goals and also whether there's been any resistance to them from the industry or residents perhaps even.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think for us locally, in January of last year, just before the pandemic, our board of directors adopted a new strategic plan, and it prioritized 4 key pillars, the first being our natural resources, Hawaiian culture, our larger community, and then brand marketing. Within that context, though, we had all the same pressures I think many destinations had. Hawaii in 2019 had 10.4 million visitors. It's the highest we've ever had. And there was a lot of that pressure that we were seeing. And so our board, in responding to that, shifted our key performance indicators. And the first one is our resident sentiment. Basically, how do residents feel about tourism? Does it bring more benefits than problems? We've been running a survey since 1988 asking that question and a few others over that entire data set until this current year. And so that's our first metric, is how are residents feeling? The second is our visitor satisfaction. Do people feel value when they come to Hawaii? And do they feel like they had a good experience? And then the next is per person per day spend, and total expenditures round out the top 4 of those metrics, because we cannot ignore the economic benefit. It's 17 billion in expenditures, 217,000 jobs pre-pandemic. And so we can't ignore that, but we knew in a holistic way, we had to understand the sentiment for residents and then visitor satisfaction as part of that. And I'll just throw this in too. We still measure all the other stuff. Arrivals get measured, RevPAR, ADR, we still track all that stuff because it's important, but we've emphasized those 4, knowing that if we don't take care of those first 2, the rest won't matter.
Has it been hard at all, Kalani, to get the industry sort of behind those new measurements and seeing that there are measurements that are placed higher than their own sort of economic benefit, and with elected officials who like big numbers and like to be able to tout big numbers?
No, I actually think we have really good consensus around those measures. I think what's unique about Hawaii, as a state organization, my stakeholders are the residents. And so my 12-member board is focused on these natural resources and the residents of the state. And the boards of those other companies will take care of their constituencies and stakeholders, right? And so it's finding that balance and creating this, I think in some ways it's a healthy tension to make sure that that exists in keeping things balanced.
I think one of the biggest challenges that we face as an industry, especially being funded through public money and the responsibility to report back to our funding bodies, is that we tend to, and I fell prey to it in my time in Sedona, you tend to only focus on the numbers. So when we go in front of our city council or our county councils, we talk about for every dollar spent, $14 is recirculated in the community. And we talk about the number of jobs and the sales taxes collected and the bed taxes collected. And it positioned us inadvertently as only caring about that. So the perception that we gave in the community was that we only cared about the numbers. And we, I mean, the organization, the destination marketing organization, the chamber, the business community, the tourism industry, when that's all we're talking about, because we're sort of forced to talk about that through our funding sources, that's what residents start to believe you only care about. So the key lesson that I learned in that was to make sure that we're also guiding the conversation and talking about the other things that matter, that are maybe more indirect or induced value of what we bring to the community. And that was a really big learning lesson, because over the years, we accidentally positioned ourselves as sort of the big, greedy business community, or change, or only caring about more money, more jobs, more tax revenues. And that wasn't our intention. We just kind of got forced in that conversation because of the funding conversation.
And that falls right into the notion that, that Destinations International has been touting the last couple of years about the importance of becoming that, demonstrating that you are that shared community value. It's beyond the dollars and cents. It's a chain. It's helping the community attain its goals there, and the role you play in that.
So true, Amir. And we've been talking in Colorado about creating a new value proposition for tourism, as we've been moving more toward the destination management side. And so and Jennifer, you're exactly right. Those long-time classic measurements of tourism success just don't quite fit that model for a destination management organization. And we all have to really be thinking hard about the ways that we're measuring success in the future. Resident sentiment, I think, is absolutely front and center. One of my favorite findings from the survey that we did do and with Longwoods in 2019 was 71% of our residents strongly agreed that the state tourism office should take an active role in promoting sustainable tourism. That was it was a ringing endorsement of that direction. But I just actually joined the Travel Foundation Board of Directors as a trustee this week. And I'm so taken with some of the measurement concepts that they're bringing forward. And one of them is what they call the travel barometer, which I think is really something to really consider. They measure the benefits, the costs, and the benefits of tourism. And they really talk about making sure you know the impacts of what you're proposing, as well as the benefits, and then making a plan to address the impacts and really focus on what the net benefit is. I think that's a really interesting concept and one I'm going to be thinking very hard about in the coming year.
Kathy, to that point, I think you've just really succinctly defined what Anna Pollock is trying to get at with regenerative tourism. I think that's exactly it in a nugget. If you ask me to define what regenerative is, it's what you've just described.
And I think, as DMO leaders or as community leaders or tourism leaders, I found myself really not necessarily being so honest about the trade-offs of tourism. And going through the sustainable tourism planning process for Sedona, it really helped me be more genuine and more honest about the good and the bad of the industry. I felt like before I went through that process, when someone in the community, a resident, would come to me and talk about how upset they were about traffic and they had to wait in traffic for 20 minutes when it should normally take 5 minutes, I listened, but it was sort of a yeah, but conversation. I wasn't being honest about, to me, that was an inconvenience. And I would say, oh yeah, I understand that's an inconvenience, but did you know that tourism generates 10,000 jobs? Or yeah, but did you know you don't have a property tax because of the tourism industry? So my approach was sort of a yeah, but approach, which wasn't really genuinely acknowledging the trade-offs. And what that process allowed me to do was be more thoughtful about how we can use the power of all of the good and recognize some of the bad and mitigate those. And that was really the beauty of the development and the process of that sustainable tourism plan development, is being more honest about the trade-offs and the role that tourism can play in mitigating some of those negative impacts.
And that's quite a mindset shift. That was not an easy transition for you, I can imagine, because we were all taught to be passionate advocates for the industry, and so we easy go to the defensive. But then instead of the 1-2 punch, you're now being empathetic. I hear you, and so let's work together. Let's figure this out the right way.
Well, and because you think that part of your job is to be the #1 advocate for tourism or the #1 cheerleader for it. And sometimes it's hard to be honest about, we are having an impact here, or there is overflow parking that's happening in neighborhoods, and that is having a negative impact. So it's just acknowledging that, and you're right, it wasn't an easy transition.
It's funny. I mean, it's the natural habit that we've all built up, right? To have to be defensive of tourism, to be defensive of the DMO, to be defensive of the workforce, and breaking that habit, though, as you sort of attest, allows you to get it maybe potentially even better answers when you're sort of open to that, the realities, the criticisms and realities.
Yeah, Steve, if I could just kind of jump onto what Jennifer mentioned, right? So one of the things we've done to be more honest with ourselves is, as part of our sort of sustainability and regenerative tourism goals, we've sort of built ourselves into a larger framework called the Aloha Plus Challenge. It actually predated the UN sustainability goals, right? And the SDGs. But Hawaii has become a UN Local 2030 hub because of our work in implementing the SDGs at a local level. And so the UN saw value in that and designated Hawaii as a Local 2030 hub of learning to share out. And so one of the things that we lean on is our dashboard. And so we have an Aloha Plus dashboard or scorecard, and it has everything you could think of: statewide net greenhouse gases, total energy use, all these things. And we know that tourism is a major driver of them because of the volume, right? So when we think about the carbon footprint, we often forget about what is imported to feed visitors while they're here. And that's a cost, right? And it has a carbon footprint. Just travel to the state has a carbon footprint. So much of that goes into this dashboard to keep us honest about that.
Great. Well, we'll move on actually, Amir. Obviously, our last sort of conversation delved a bit into measurement. And it seems like there's some work that Kathy's mentioning to help define what measurement looks like and maybe even provide some of the tools, which is something I want to circle back to you on, Kathy. But, you know, Longwoods International, you were early out of the gate on measuring resident sentiment and ultimately making it affordable for a lot of destinations. Can you speak at all to any changes that you've seen in resident sentiment as a result of the pandemic? And maybe even more importantly for the audience, what, if any, successful strategies you're seeing for, you know, addressing those changes?
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, we've been doing it on a larger scale for 3 years now. Obviously, not as long as Kalani and his team in Hawaii, but 3 years ago, we started, we ran the first national benchmark of resident sentiment towards tourism in one's backyard. And we've repeated this on an annual basis since in partnership with Destinations International. And the methodology allows us to replicate it on local and regional and even statewide levels, as Kathy referenced there. We've been doing this for a few years now, and we've had a lot of learnings. And the one learning that has been consistent, both pre-pandemic and throughout the pandemic, is that, you know, the general public, generally speaking, residents are very supportive of tourism promotion, tourism development. Generally speaking, again, there's regional issues and so forth elsewhere, depending where you go across the country. But the one thing that is consistent is that in every community, no matter what size we've been talking to, there is a disconnect. The residents feel there is a disconnect between tourism development and them. They feel that they're not engaged. They feel they don't have a say quite often, and they feel that the first time they're hearing about development or something that's happening in the backyard is when they read about it in the paper. You know, when the photo of the groundbreaking is happening and so forth. And one of the things we've been seeing evolve over the last few years as we've been doing these things, and obviously Jennifer and Kathy and, you know, Kalani and her team, you know, they've been early adapters of this even before us. But what we've seen really happening in response to this is that more and more destinations are now adding resident engagement as part of their overall business plan. They have their communications plan, their engagement plans for various stakeholder groups and so forth. But as DMOs, quite frankly, we were typically engaging for years only with those who controlled our purse strings: city council, county commissioners, various influential stakeholder groups, maybe the local EDAs and so forth. But we left the residents at mass. The only time we invited them in was National Travel and Tourism Week or month, and we had our open house, right? We had pizza and cookies, and here's our stats on how much we mean to the community. Have a nice day, you know. There. So we're seeing more thoughtful engagement plans now being developed, and kind of fishing where the fish gather. And you know, I feel sorry for DMOs because they have so much on their plate. But now I see more and more DMOs asking the question internally: who's going to be at the city, not at city council meetings? That's important too. But who's going to be at the school board meetings? Who's going to be where the town halls are happening? Maybe we should be holding our own town halls. Maybe we should be that resource in there, and for opportunities for engagement, showing how there's a tourism angle to every one of these community concerns. So we've seen that happening. Obviously, since the pandemic, one of the most dramatic things we've seen is a major hesitancy of residents to welcome visitors back into their community, right? From a few factors. Obviously, the fear of them bringing COVID into the community, but also some communities don't have the medical capacity. Communities of 12,000 that might see an influx of 100,000 visitors doesn't necessarily have the hospital infrastructure and all that to deal with those issues. So we're seeing those types of issues popping up. And I will say, from the travel sentiment research we've been doing since the beginning of the pandemic, our several most recent waves have shown that while American travelers plan, are now 81% of them are planning travel in the next 6 months. So that's been on a great upward trajectory. So the light at the end of the tunnel is coming. But at the same time, every week for the last 2 months, as we've asked that question, only 41% of residents feel good about welcoming visitors back in their community, and that stayed flat. So that tells us that engagement needs to happen.
Are there any specific prescriptions for what that engagement needs to entail? I mean, have you been able to get at that? It makes complete sense. You need to talk to the community broadly, just like we do in marketing, right? We want to be where our consumer is. But are you hearing or finding in the research what the messaging is that residents need to hear to assure or assuage concerns that they have?
They want to feel that they're heard. And again, different strokes for different folks. It depends on every community, and every community's wired a little bit differently. From big cities to small towns and so forth. So there's no one secret sauce or secret formula for this. I mean, you look at what Jennifer successfully did in Sedona for a number of years, and you look what Kathy's doing on a statewide basis. Some really great examples there. And seriously, if you haven't looked at what Hawaii's doing, if you haven't read through the plan that Kalani just shared in the chat feature there, take a look at it. There's all kinds of different approaches to get there. In smaller communities, it's having those town halls. It's just providing those open forums, engaging them. In the larger communities, it's finding the key influencers in those communities and engaging them to help spread the message, making them your brand ambassadors. Look at the makeup of your boards of your ambassadors. Turning them, making that an active board that's representing of the various segments of the community and the diversity of the community and so forth. I'm sorry, it's a vague answer, but there's not one way to approach this. It's all going to be based on your understanding of your community.
It's a great answer, actually. And thanks, Amir, for it. I appreciate it.
I'll give you an example of how we approach this during pandemic. We were starting to hear those very concerns you were explaining, Amir, about concerns about visitors concerns about residents welcoming visitors into their midst when their own medical systems were already under a lot of pressure. And so when we started launching our awareness campaign around the appropriate steps to take during pandemic, it was really operating at two levels. I was actually calling it internally our resident reassurance program. And the idea was to reassure residents that we were educating visitors before they came into their communities to take the appropriate steps, which were still unfamiliar to a lot of people. We called it our Care for Coloradans initiative. And then since then, we've moved into a sort of a different phase where we now call it Do Colorado Right. And we've enlisted, again, fun videos. We've enlisted like Olympic snowboard gold medalist Red Gerard and Bachelor contestant Ben Higgins and two-time Top Chef competitor Brother Luck, and had them make these sort of fun videos about how you do Colorado right. Again, it's operating at two levels. We share them internally in our state so that residents can see how we're communicating this. And we're also sharing these with people who book travel to Colorado. So it's one of those ways that we're just, trying to address a very real concern and hopefully warm up the welcome for our visitors as well.
That is the ancillary benefit, right? You end up with a community that's happy to see tourists and visitors from out of town.
And that was, I think, one of the biggest learning lessons for me too, in going through the sustainable tourism planning process, was about our communications. Prior to going through that process, we had outlets like in our local newspaper, and we would use that local article to talk about our upcoming mixer or our upcoming event that we were having for skill building seminars. And what we really became way more thoughtful in what we communicate to our particular audiences, and we're more careful in identifying. We have our business audience that we communicate messaging to them. We have a residential audience, and we really need to communicate to them in a much more meaningful way, which we had never really done before. And then, of course, we have our visitor audience, which we're typically really good at communicating to both of those audiences. We did some programs in Sedona to engage locals in a more thoughtful way. I would have a coffee chat monthly where we would just open up our office and invite locals to come and talk about anything that was on their mind. And then that gave us some tools to understand what the community wanted to hear about. And then we would talk about that in our local articles in the newspaper and on the radio, instead of promoting a mixer or a typical business event. So we really engaged the locals like we never really had before, and talked about what we were doing and why, and just as importantly, what we weren't doing and why. Because so many times they have ideas of what we're doing that we're, or what they think we're doing, and we're not. So really talking about that why was important. But I think one thing that came to mind as you were talking, Amir, was how are we going to come out of this pandemic? Is our locals going to feel like, oh, I got my Park City back and I like it with less visitors and I don't have to wait in line at the grocery store or for my favorite restaurant? Or are we going to come out as a community recognizing that tourism is fragile and that we need to support it and we need to invest in it? And I think that's one of our biggest roles as the Destination Marketing and Management Organization, is to help guide that conversation so that when we do come out of it, we're somewhere in the middle of that, so that we don't have this residential rebellion happening and people liking the quietness of their communities.
I completely agree, and that and that's the trick, right? And that's a central role for the destination marketing or destination marketing management organization to be there in the middle of that dialogue. And Jennifer, kudos. Again, when you're talking, when you're proactively engaging the residents, when you're being open and transparent, this is who we are, this is who we're not, and so forth. You're building that trust within the community there. And if you have that, and right now, especially coming out of this crisis, that trust in the community is going to be so important in there. The one other thing that I left out, when we're doing our research, like I said, a majority of residents are supportive. The number of naysayers, generally speaking, nationally, is a smaller group, but there's this, and a lot of these key issues of tourism and the environment, tourism sustainability, stewardship, so forth. There's this big middle group that's kind of the not for, not against, kind of the in there. And we're talking quite often, it's somewhere between 25 to 35% of your residents in there. Now think about if those 25 or 35 got together with the 20% that are the naysayers, now you got a problem. That's great that 55% supported what you're doing, but those negatives with the naysayers, or with the middle of the road naysayers, you got a problem. And it's really, at the end of the day, you won the guys who love you. It's about the middle. You're marketing to the middle, so to speak, in this thing, and we have to all keep that in mind. You're never going to win the naysayers. You may never win them. You'll get their respect and you can get their trust, but you're never going to win all those guys over. But you'll definitely have the opportunity to win the middle, because the middle, when we dig into it, they're mostly just uninformed, uneducated, and they're drawing their own conclusions from their own experiences in the community. Like the myth that everybody in tourism is a burger flipper or ticket taker making minimum wage, right? Well, why? Well, because if you're average Joe, who do you encounter when you're on your trips? The front desk clerk at the hotel, the server at the restaurant, the person operating the ride at the theme park, who took your ticket, and those kind of things. Chances are you're not engaging with the upper management, the marketing team, the whole brain trust that's behind the scenes, the back of the house, and so forth. So there's, you're really telling that story to the middle, and we can't lose focus of that.
Amir is preparing himself for his next career as a political consultant for the next wave of elections, actually.
No, thanks.
Well, we've got a lot of questions, and I'm really hoping that we can get to most, if not all of them. But I want to end this sort of portion with a quick lightning round for you guys. And that is, for our audience, what are the new questions that they need to be asking within their own communities that sort of helped put you on the paths that you have been on?
Yeah. I guess I think you were kicking it over to me, Steve. So I would just encourage everyone to think about what are those forces in play right now that may not have been in play before pandemic. In our case, we've seen this huge surge of interest in public lands. And so that requires us to find a delicate balance between protecting these public lands and reigniting the tourism economy. But we have to do it in a way where we are attracting people and not being seen as part of the problem of pushing too many people into a pressured destination. So it's finding that new delicate balance on how we balance promotion and stewardship.
Back to that word balance, and over to you, Jennifer. Perfect segue.
Being new to my position here in Park City, just about 4 months old, I think some of the biggest challenges that I'm facing is being realistic about the challenges that the industry is facing right now in the middle of COVID, and the realities of how hard it is for our business community, and focusing on the short-term business recovery as we come out of COVID, while still planting some seeds about sustainability and sustainable tourism management and communication to our different audiences. And that's a challenge right now, because I'm not sure how much our businesses really want to hear about sustainability and management right now, because they're struggling. So, what I'm asking right now, being new to my position and new to the community, is what are we doing well? What can we improve on? What is the community doing well? What role can our organization play in making positive change in the community? And really not just looking as our role of a destination marketing and sales agency, but broadening that role in the community to really become more of a community organization rather than just a business organization or just a tourism organization.
And Kalai?
I think for me, a lot of that tension exists about recovery versus reinventing, reimagining. To that end, though, I think you can accomplish both by asking ourselves what is most important and who benefits from the work that we do. And then I think you couple that, though, I guess, sorry, I'm always going to go back to this Hawaiian frame of mind, but this intergenerational and this long string of time, right? It's not about the immediate only. Yes, you want to recover now, but you want to recover better, right? And you want to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. And so just that holistic sort of way of looking at it, and then the long view, I think is really important. I know the pain is really sore right now, and we can recover quickly, but we got to do it right. So how do you do that? Holistic, long view.
Terrific. And Amir, you bring a different perspective to the table. So how would you respond to that?
No, I agree with all these answers, especially the holistic part of it. Don't look at it. One of the things we say in market research all the time is, never base your conclusions on one data set. Always triangulate your data. So you have to look at it from several angles. Take that holistic picture and interpret it thus.
Terrific. Well, thank you all for the participation in the first part of this. As I mentioned, and as you guys have seen, there's a ton of questions coming through. So we'll try to get through all of these, and as I noted in the chat box, we'll respond in writing to those that we are not able to answer. And so let's see, starting with O'Brien's question, and maybe Kathy, you spoke about this a little bit already, but what are some ways that you identify and communicate with high value visitors?
Well, we do it through our marketing. We're able to be so intentional about who it is we're talking to these days. And so we're able to identify, certain parameters. So for instance, with our backcountry safety awareness campaign, we were able to target people who were showing buying signals for certain types of backcountry safety awareness equipment. They were booking travel. So we were able to zero in our message on, when we were trying to do that. Inclusivity, opens up a whole new area of opportunity. And, we're working with our media agency to identify ways of carrying specific messages to specific diversity audiences. Fortunately, media buying is our friend these days. We can be so specific about who we want to talk to. But then I think it's also just, the way that we frame travel opportunities in our state as well. One of our goals, as I mentioned, was dispersion. And so we've made it very easy for travelers to find their way to less visited parts of Colorado. I have to say, we drew inspiration from Jennifer's work around Sedona's Secret Seven. That was really the genesis of our Colorado road trips microsite, which has now 200 searchable itineraries on how you can find your way to less visited destinations.
This next question, I'm going a little out of order here because there is some synergy between some of these questions. We've obviously talked a lot about the high value visitor, and I think that collectively you have defined that as being more than just an economic definition. But we have a question from one of the attendees about managing a diverse portfolio. Is there still a space for mid-value, that are still travelers that reflect and respect your core values? And I think to some degree that you have answered these questions, but I did want to give an opportunity for, maybe Jennifer, if you want to speak to that one.
I don't know if I have anything more to add on that. I think it's just really important that as communities we're open and that our residents are hospitable to all visitors. But, we, as Kathy said, really focusing on attracting the highest value visitor through our marketing efforts that not everyone will see, and assuming that those messages will trickle down through maybe incomes or through, different demographic sets, knowing that if you target high, it will trickle down, but it wouldn't necessarily if you target perhaps a lower household income, for example, in some of your marketing, that it most likely won't trickle up. Yeah.
I think I can maybe just add something quick, Steve, is for us in Hawaii, the Aloha Spirit is one that is inclusive. And so, yes, while we have these targets, we'd like to, hit, I think to Kathy's point, that rounded out vision of what a visitor is really important to us. I also have to be really realistic with the product that we have. And when I look at my visitor plan inventory, I've got a third luxury, I've got a third sort of that middle tier, and a third of that lower tier. And so it's really important to recognize what I have. But also what I think is important about that for us as a destination is that we build a relationship with that traveler over their lifetime. So, hey, maybe they come for spring break as a college kid, then they come back and get married, and then they come back with the kids and the grandkids when they're older. And it's really about the life cycle of this relationship to Hawaii that I think is important. So that mix, I think, is one that builds over time.
Yeah, I think that's really great guidance. It's a different way for, I think, a lot of destinations to sort of think about that visitor. Certainly you hear more and more, airlines and hotels that are thinking about the lifetime value of that customer. And to see more destinations doing that, I think is a great evolution sort of for the industry. Staying on that subject, we've got a number of questions that sort of relate to the communication, how you're communicating with travelers. And one of the ones we have here from Lauren is about, how do you balance that that communication about proper etiquette and sort of rules, which can come across sometimes as can feel unwelcoming. It's like the store that you go into where there's no, all the no's that you can't do, and oh well, and by the way, welcome. How are you finding that you're juggling that messaging? Are you finding ways that you can share with the audience of balancing that?
We've chosen to use humor in Colorado. We specifically stayed away from being that finger wagging, preachy voice, because that's not a Colorado voice anyway. We wanted to invite people into our sustainability ethic and make them excited about being part of it and being like a Coloradan when they were in Colorado.
I think we've tried that same strategy, not the finger wagging. We know that that doesn't work. When we travel, don't like that either. And so really it was about shared values. So for us, we had a Kuleana campaign. Kuleana means responsibility in Hawaiian. And so it really was, hey, you want to live like a local, right? We hear that from you. This is how. So let me invite you into our values. This is how we do it.
And a really easy tactical way, one of the tactics of the Sustainable Tourism Plan in Sedona was a visitor pledge. I know a lot of communities are doing this sort of thing, but we looked at the residential sentiment survey and identified what are the pinch points that our residents have with tourism. And we know what those are, right? It's traffic, it's overflow of neighborhoods, it's quiet neighborhoods for short-term rentals in their communities and in their neighborhoods. It's protecting the dark skies. It's picking up your pup poo and not leaving, toilet paper in our parks. So we identified what those things were, and we developed a visitor pledge, the Sedona Cares visitor pledge, which was a way then to communicate our values really clearly and concisely to our visitor, but then to communicate that to our resident that, look, this is what we're asking. We're just not inviting someone into our home and letting them behave any way that they want to behave. We're actually encouraging them to behave in a way that lives up to the beauty of the place and the beauty and expectations of the people. And a visitor pledge is a really easy way to do that.
And at the end of the day, most visitors do want to do the right thing. So whether the approach is a pledge or using humor through marketing campaigns and initiatives and so forth, they're aware of that. They respond to that. Kathy, I remember we measured the Leave No Trace campaign for you that first year. It was an extremely high recall, like 85% or something like that, if I recall correctly. So they notice this, they're impacted by it, and they generally do. Yeah, there's a few bad apples everywhere, but overall, more will want to do the right thing than not.
That's actually a great segue, Amir, because we had a question about the Leave No Trace program and sort of what were some of the successful strategies implemented through that. So perhaps you can speak to that a little bit, Kathy.
Yeah, well, we started off down this path wanting to create messaging for travelers, but we thought it would generate a lot more power and a lot more acceptance if we were aligning ourselves with a credible partner. So we approached Leave No Trace about using their messaging platform, and they were very open to modifying their original Leave No Trace 7 principles into the Care for Colorado principles. We created that as a model for other destinations to use, and now there are several other states and destinations that are using this model as well. And I invite everyone to move down this path too. But we tried to make it simple and punchy, and memorable. And so we have things like Trash the Trash, which encompasses poop. By the way, Jennifer, I never thought I'd be talking about that in tourism promotion, but it's a problem. And let's see, keep wildlife wild and be careful with fire. These are know before you go. These are simple directives, and then we interpret them. And then we ask our partners across Colorado. We now have 26 statewide organizations, tourism-based organizations that have joined us now in sharing this message and basically amplify our messaging that we create for free to all of those audiences. So it includes, U.S. Forest Service has joined us, Bureau of Land Management, the Colorado River Outfitters Association, the Hotel and Lodging Association. So we have all of these statewide partners now who are helping us share this message without a dime of paid media.
Terrific. There are so many great questions, and I'm looking at the time. So as I mentioned in the chat box, we will work to get written answers out to these, because I think there's some phenomenal questions about funding here, about moving beyond just communication strategies to actually work with the industry itself to be implementing practices. So definitely want to address these. And but I have to thank all of you for your incredible insights today. I couldn't have imagined a better panel. Again, you're also knowledgeable and passionate, so thank you very much. And I will toss it back to you, Will.
Steve, thank you. Thanks to the TripAdvisor team. This was an incredible conversation. It came alive as we knew we would. Such a fascinating topic. But Helani, thank you so much. Jennifer, Amir, Kathy, thank you for joining us. And Steve, thanks again for your incredible support. Amazing day. 2 weeks from now, See Tomorrow series will continue. March 10th, 1 o'clock with how an evolving marketing strategy drives value-based visitors to your destination. So I think a nice way of picking up on the conversation that we've had today. And then on March 24th, we're going to celebrate 1 year of webinars since the pandemic hit. Our first webinar actually last year was March 26th, and have held a travel industry webinar every week since. A series of marketing webinars for 4 months, and then we did the eTourism Summit stuff through the month of October. So a lot of great news. And then we'll look forward to hopefully seeing you all in September at eTourism Summit in Las Vegas, co-located with IPW on the 20th through the 22nd. So I can thank you all. And Steve, I believe you've got another event that you wanted to make sure everybody was aware of.
Well, I'll just mention it because it is a bit, it does answer actually one of the questions that came up, which is, the tools for measuring this. And, a lot of destinations are obviously relying on Amir's terrific resident sentiment surveys. There's so many conversations happening online about our destinations. And tomorrow we're hosting a webinar along with Destination Think on the Tourism Sentiment Index, which allows destinations to see the conversations that are happening about their destinations and understand, are those positive? Are they negative? How are they trending? How is a destination performing relative to its competitive set? And it offers insights into product development. But again, it's that pulse of not just visitors, but residents and the conversations that they're having about travel and tourism, the destination. So it's 2 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow, and I encourage you to check us out if you have the time to join us.
Awesome. And just for everybody, this webinar will be recorded. It will be on eTourism Summit on the See Tomorrow series, so you can share it with share this incredible insight with everybody. Thank you guys so much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you all and your insight and leadership in this industry.